to be next to me? Let's do that. Well, you never know. You want to water? Thank you, everyone.
It's okay, so they don't tell them to play the trailer. Why did you put me here and we were there? Now we can't go straight.
Well, because it's after the panel. Anyway, we get 1 point every time we say Netflix.
Netflix, and then what else? So I worked on this TV series that was developed for Netflix.
Yeah, one point every time we say
2 points.
No, that's like a few years ago. She brought it and he was like, you get 1 point every time you say Netflix, Brexit. I don't remember what it said.
Netflix, Brexit?
I don't remember the third one. So this smart.
Maybe Festival de Cannes?
No, that's too easy.
It's boring.
Yeah.
And then what did you say about Netflix at the end?
Nothing, but someone always ends up talking about Netflix. You know,
It's already time counting because you've said Netflix quite a lot.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hi, we're ready to start. Welcome to another Agora talk. My name is Christina Liapi. I work as a sales agent for the Greek production and sales company Heretic, but I'm here representing the Agora team as a moderator for this panel that we have ahead. We're here to get to know and discuss Story2Market, which S2M for short, which is a new program that aims to introduce new ways of creating and developing stories, teaming up marketeers with filmmakers, and fusing development and marketing early on. We're going to talk about our speakers' views on where the industry stands today and which questions are most important to ask going ahead, and the basic idea behind S2M and why it can lead to better and fuller stories, and then go on to describe briefly what the program will work, how it will work, and what it will entail. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Mathias Noschis is a film marketing strategist. Stephen Cleary is a film producer, screenwriter, and story development consultant. And Vicky Miha is a film consultant and producer. And I'd like to also introduce Lena Ramo, who is the S2M founder and director, audiovisual consultant, and media program expert. If you'd like to say something.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here, attending this, our first public launch of S2M. Let me thank first all the panelists for accepting our invitation. Let me thank Thessaloniki Film Festival and the University of the Aegean for taking this adventure and being partnering with us at S2M. And also our sponsors, the Greek Film Center, Ecomese, our associate partner, Sofia Meetings, and also the companies Asterisk and Alphapanda for supporting us. Thank you. Enjoy.
So all the speakers today are involved in the day-to-day of developing and financing marketing and launching projects in the marketplace. And so they see firsthand how rapidly the landscape is changing alongside the technology that's available to us to actually get the projects made. And how is that shaping the work that we do? What do filmmakers and storytellers need to think about in terms of how they work, and as we look forward to the next 4 to 5 years, and what new skills do they need to explore? How will the collaboration work in a world where, you know, the distribution and exhibition mechanisms are changing this rapidly? And how, of course, do we keep managing to have a relationship with our audiences throughout these changes? So I would like each person to briefly introduce themselves and talk about their work a little bit, and then let us know what they think filmmakers should be thinking about and be more aware of in the next 4 to 5 years. Vicky?
Hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Vicky Miha. I'm a producer and a film consultant for the past 12 years, and I have produced a few films, but I have also worked on many projects on development on marketing and financing from the stage of development, as well as about 40 films at the stage of delivery. And the company Asterisk was launched in 2017, so since then we have been very active in this field, and we collaborate with many producers who are developing different projects from all over Europe, mostly from Europe, but also from some places across the ocean. So what is changing in the past 10 years? I would say that there are radical changes in our field, and I know that probably all of you are aware of them. Next to platforms that are dominating everything, streamers are becoming very strong. If you think like in 2010, 2011, hardly ever, we had hardly heard of all these developments. The technology is changing as well, obviously. I remember the films we were making in 2009, 2010 were mostly on film. They were distributed on film. Digital was not so much present. Social media and everything that surrounds them has changed radically. There have been even like some recent films about social media themselves. So the way we approach the stories and the way we market them is certainly very different from what it used to be. And there are certain trends that we see in the producing field that are becoming more and more often lately. For example, one of the things I have noticed working on development of projects is that many producers that have produced highly acclaimed films, very art house sometimes, festival films, they are starting to develop TV series. And that's I think that almost every company I work now, they have a TV series in development. And these TV series are mostly intended for a wider audience, not for the audience that will watch a very art house film from, I don't know, Estonia. It is a more mainstream thing. So the other thing that happens is that they bring all their creatives that have been making this very art house, or not very art house films, but a lot of the very highly acclaimed directors and writers of each territory, they start developing TV series. That happens even in Greece. So with the intention to sell these TV series to broadcasters and streamers eventually, because this is like the dream, these has to be developed in a way that they have the audience in mind more than the feature films that were being developed before. So this is something that I think that is a new skill to be found, how to approach the story from the beginning with a marketing perspective. And I don't say that this has to happen for every film, and I don't see it happening for every film, especially the films that are the more artistic, the more daring, the more innovative in their way. But for sure, the producers and some filmmakers have to understand a little bit better what is the market and how to see their projects with this perspective.
Thank you. Mathias, would you like to go next?
So, hi, it's not working. Hi, so I'm Mathias. I'm the founder of a small company that's based in Berlin called Alphapanda, and we specialize in film marketing. And the reason why I wanted to kind of work in that area is I was working like several different roles within the film industry before that, and I kind of felt like there is a bit of a missing link between production and distribution. And the way I like to describe marketing is I feel the world of production and the world of distribution are talking different languages, and I feel the world of production here in Europe is mostly based on how to say, on an artistic basis. So, you know, it's on a cultural basis. I mean, most of the time, directors are making films without really thinking about the market. They're making films, you know, from, let's say, some kind of need to express something. And then there is the world of distribution, sales, the exhibition, you know, cinemas. And that one is talking the language of the market, because that is mostly a market. It's heavily subsidized, but it's still mostly a market. And you know, ultimately what you need is people to buy tickets. And I feel these two worlds are not really communicating with each other enough. And for me, marketing is a bit the language that allows these two worlds to communicate together. And so I come myself from a family where there are lots of family and things like that. So I feel like that's a bit what I'm doing today with working with marketing. You know, when I work with producers, when I work with filmmakers early on at an early stage of development, I feel like, you know, what I'm trying to do is to teach them the language of distribution so that I feel it really empowers them. Because if you're a producer, if you're a director, and you go and talk to a sales agent, you go and talk to a distributor, and you already have an idea of the place of your film on the market, and you have an idea of how you want to market it, how you want to, you know, approach the market, how you want to engage the audience. Basically, you get a conversation at eye level with that distributor, with that sales agent. Let's be honest, at the end of the day, it's still going to be the sales agent or the distributor who's going to decide exactly how to do that, because from the moment you give the rights to that person, that is the person who's in charge. But I feel like the type of conversation that you have with those people when you're in the room, if you have thought about the marketing of your film, and if you have thought about like how to place it in the market, is going to be a completely different type of conversation. You know, a lot of producers, a lot of directors think that, you know, when you go and meet a distributor, it's all about, please, please, please take my film. But I think that's not it. You know, it's more like, does that distributor fit to the kind of film, you know, to the kind of audience I want to meet? And are we a good fit? That should be the approach. And I feel like when that is the approach, then the conversation is much more interesting. And so that's a bit, like for me, you know, the definition of marketing. And so, of course, if we think about what's going to happen in the next 10 years, I can definitely see, I mean, we specialize in social media, so I definitely see, you know, digital becoming bigger and bigger. I think Cannes this year was really interesting. This was the first year I really saw like a big shift happening in Cannes, at the Cannes Film Festival this year, that all of a sudden, most of the films were present somehow on social media, whereas in the previous years, it could easily happen that films were buzzing a lot without having any presence on social media, without doing anything, and that changed. This year in Cannes, like most of the films had some kind of presence on social media, and that will become like bigger. Luckily for us, because that's what we specialize in. And then also, I mean, yeah, I feel, of course, the platforms, I mean, I'm going to say the big word, I mean, Netflix and stuff, you know, of course, that's completely changing the way we approach the audience, because I feel nowadays there is more and more room for some more kind of niche films. You know, I'm working on 3 projects where, you know, we're doing a marketing strategy for producers, projects in development, and all 3 of them are heavily genre films. Like one is a horror film, and 2 of them are sci-fi films. that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. I feel like, nowadays people also see more space for these kind of niche projects because there will be a way to reach an audience that may be a niche audience, but that's a global audience, whereas before you had to think national and therefore you had to think like, the more kind of traditional art house audience. So I would say that's kind of the direction I can see us going towards.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Cleary. I work in, I have worked most of my life in development, but I've also done a certain amount of producing and writing at the same time. So I kind of, in a different way, I come from this same question from almost like the bottom up. I've been working with writers all around the world, mainly in Europe, but also in Australia and New Zealand, and a good deal of indigenous writing as well. So you're often dealing with, particularly in Australia, with writers who aren't literate. They can't necessarily write, but they have stories to tell. So a lot of my work in Australia has been, how do you work with writers who don't write in the conventional sense? So development becomes a different process when you do that. One of the things I've noticed recently, which has changed from the development perspective than it used to be, say, 5 or 10 years ago, is more and more you get presented with a story. Someone says, well, we work on the story together. And the question starts to arise, well, what is this? 5 years ago, I would be sent a project and it would be, well, this is a TV series, or this is a feature film. This is, an online series. And there was never a discussion at that point, okay, well, what if it wasn't? What if it was something else? The notion of what a story is becoming, from the development perspective, from someone who's working in it every day, is becoming much more fluid. That people understand that the story that they're working on has possible manifestations in different ways. And the idea that this is a feature film from the start is something that many of the projects I work on are exactly that. They are a feature film, they are a series. But more and more, you start to see projects where people are beginning to say, well, what is it exactly? And they're working on the story without necessarily making the commitment at that stage that this is this kind of a story. So, and this is particularly true of younger writers and directors and producers, that the notion of where the story appears, where it goes and what it is becoming much more fluid and flexible. And I think that's because as the evolution of digital technology goes on, as our world is more and more evolving in terms of different kinds of media and different kinds of ways you can access stories, that people are beginning to think of stories in a much more complex and fluid way. Now, the question I would then ask is, what are the implications of that change, which I think is coming, I think it's already here, and I think it's going to get bigger and faster. What are the implications of that for the people who are involved in the business of making stories? And more specifically for me, what are the implications for the process of development? So I'm not necessarily talking about, distribution or the various places the story will end up. How do you develop a story if the idea of where the story is going to be is not as set or defined as it used to be? So what processes do you use? How do you do that? But one of the things that occurs to me, which is what S2M was kind of the original idea of it, is that, well, if stories are much more fluid and we don't necessarily have to make a decision as early as we used to about where the story goes, then maybe in that development process, you need to bring into that process people who are much more experienced and knowledgeable about the various places a story can go. And then the question is, if you do that, how does that change the process of development? And how does that inhibit the writer? Does the writer start to go, hang on a second, I don't want to have to think about, where the story goes. I don't want to think about marketing ideas. This is not what I am. Or do they learn things from that conversation that will help them develop and evolve their projects? Now, I want to say very quickly that I don't think this is something that, if someone wants to make a feature film and that's what they want to make, a writer, a director, I'm not saying, you have to do something else. But I do think very seriously that I keep thinking about 2006, 15 years ago, and I think about how the world was then, and how I understood things. And now I'm thinking about 2036, in 15 years' time. The only thing I know about 2036, based on my understanding of 2006, is the way that we do things is going to be very, very different. and our audiences are evolving and changing very quickly, and their knowledge and understanding of how to access stories and the technological capacity to do that is also changing very quickly. So we're not going to be doing what we do now in 15 years the way we do it now. Okay, I don't know how we're going to be doing it, but I know it's going to be different. And so partly what I'm interested in, or we're interested in, is saying, well, how do we affect and explore that difference? You know, how do we, together as a community of creative and business people, how do we find the ways of understanding how these things might work? What I've done in the past few years myself is work with filmmakers and ask them questions about how you conceive of the idea of your story. Okay, so I say, for example, what if you thought about how the story was distributed before you knew what the story was? What if you thought about how you would sell the story before you knew what the story was, rather than saying, I have a story, now how do I sell it? Now, the thing I would point out is that when you do development, when you do, for example, a treatment or a synopsis or an outline, this is a marketing process. You have an idea and you have to sell it to someone. If you're a writer, you have to sell the idea to a producer. The writing of a treatment or an outline is a marketing exercise. It's a creative exercise, but you are always selling. Because you have to sell the story to your producer. The producer goes, this is fantastic, let's do it. Okay, so you have to sell the idea. You're always selling. So if someone on the creative side says, oh, selling is, it's difficult for me to get my head around, it seems foreign to what I do, you sell all the time. Pitching is selling, discussing a story is selling. It's part of the process of creating. So if you just start playing with that, what happens when you play? I just want to show you one clip, one project that I worked on. I just want to describe how this story was arrived at. We sat down with a group of filmmakers in Australia, this is in Adelaide, and we gave them money to make a feature film. In Australian terms, it was a low-budget feature film, $700,000, which is a reasonable amount of money. We gave them the money before we knew what the story was. So we interviewed all the filmmakers in South Australia, and we chose 6 teams. And we said, okay, all of you are going to be given the budget for your film, but we don't want to know what the film is until after you're given the money. Okay, so we're choosing you on your talent, not on your idea. And then once you have the decision, now you have to make a film. You've got 2 years. Okay, so each of you in groups have to, this is what we did together. This particular story came from an idea that we had, which was, what if you think of how you're going to make the story sell, i.e. be attracted to a film festival in particular, without knowing what the story was, okay, without knowing it. Okay, and the idea is here, these filmmakers came up with the idea, we're going to shoot a film every Tuesday for a year. This is the production of the film. So they're going to take a year to shoot the film, and the film is going to be shot every Tuesday, 1 day a week for a year, and the film is going to feature in that film one Tuesday from every Tuesday in a year. So this is 52 Tuesdays in the life of a family. Now that idea of shooting 52 Tuesdays in the life of a family was created before they knew who the family were and before they knew what the content was. Okay, and their idea was, if you say to a film festival, would you like to see my film? It was shot 1 day a week for a year, and it features in the film 1 day a week for a year. Okay, it's an interesting notion of, well, you won't get many films like that. Then, hopefully, you have a film that has an interesting story within it. Of course, you have to have a good story, but you don't have to start with a good story. You can start with the notion of how to make the story, and then you put the story in. And because they started with this idea, the story that they came up with has to be about the life of a year. It has to be limited to one family, because you're literally every Tuesday in the year is in the film. So you can't have huge long scenes from one day that spend 15 minutes, because you've got all the 52 Tuesdays of the year to put into the film. So it makes all sorts of demands creatively on the storytellers. And out of that comes this work. Now, the other thing I want to say about this briefly is that no one involved in this film had ever directed, produced, written, acted in, composed, shot, or cut a feature film before. Everyone involved in this film was doing it for the first time. Okay, so it's suddenly you see the kind of the creative potential of thinking about things in a different way. Can we just play the trailer with the audio on so you can see it? It's very short.
telling the biggest bunch of lies. He said that I'm going to live with him full time now. Mum!
Before we can prescribe hormones, your mum must continue to come to us for assessment. Now, I understand you've taken a male name. What do you think about your mum's new name, Billy?
So do I call you Dad now?
Whatever you're comfortable with, I suppose.
Dad? Dad, 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 Dad. Dad? It's Tuesday.
Tuesday, same time, every week without fail.
Hey.
Hey. It's just friends from school and we just need somewhere to hang out.
Don't burn the place down and don't go on the roof.
It'll be fun. So you want to play a game?
I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time.
Okay, Jazz, take your top off.
And she's been lying to you too, you know. I mean, this is our daughter we're talking about.
Every Tuesday, she's your daughter. Not at any other time.
I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is that what makes that story, what gave it originality to start with, was the originality of the conception of the form of the story rather than the content. So we're just in development turning things around and saying, what if you think of different ways of talking about your story, shaping it? And with that specific film, the objective was an idea that a film festival would be fascinated by. Okay, not what's the story about transitioning, all of that came later. The conception of the story was a story that when you describe it to a film festival programmer, even if you can't tell them what the story is, they would go, well, that sounds interesting. Okay, and out of that comes this kind of idea. So it's just saying that you don't have to start with the story. You can start with lots of different things. And the question of how an audience reacts to a story or how you present a story to an audience, all these different, how do you market a story, all these different ideas that everybody in the process has can be brought into bear in development. And then you can say, let's do it, what if we do it differently? And the other thing that strikes me is that I watch production and marketing and sales and distribution and exhibition, and all of these things have transformed completely in the past 15, 20 years as compared to what they used to be. Development, I still do now like I did when I started. And in fact, I still do development like I could have done development in 1915. A piece of paper, a pen, a group of people in a room talking, and then doing some writing. That process is how development works now in the main. And we have all these technological changes, and I don't see yet, from my point of view, enough change in the way, what if we took all this technological change that we have and thought about how it might apply to development? What if we took the people who are doing the kind of groundbreaking work in using technology in the evolution and marketing and selling of stories, and we brought them into that circle? What would happen? And S2M is about that, is about a process of re-examining development and bringing marketeers and creative people together and to explore stories together and see what you come up with. Some people will say, well, I don't think this changes my story particularly at all, and other people will say it changes it completely. And that's fine. There isn't a single way of doing it. But we definitely need a place where we can bring these ideas together and out of that develop projects. And that's really what kind of this has stimulated, this whole development stimulated, and that's really what is kind of behind my thinking in this kind of area, which is why we started S2M in the first place.
Okay, thank you. So we're talking about new ways of finding stories and developing them and marketing them. And I was wondering if you could give us some examples of what this actually involves and what do you mean by marketing early in development, and what can you do so early in the process? And maybe Vicky and Mathias can let us know what they're already doing anyway, and Stephen can elaborate on how S2M can bring this even earlier in a more in a different way.
First of all, just a comment. I think that I see more and more a trend with producers seeking for help during development. I don't know if Mathias has noticed that as well, but I see that in the past, like, I don't know, 5, 6 years maybe, it is more of a talk. Like, we need a marketing consultant during development. We need someone to do outreach. We need someone to do audience design. This is being talked about a lot, and I don't know if it is like the fact that I work a lot with European programs, and they are all about like, oh, we have to find more audiences. It's the mandate. Let's find audiences, because they are, they don't want to give more money for films that nobody's watching. Somehow, this is a new kind of trend. What can you do during the? Also, I want to say that I'm working with many producers that they have. It depends where they come from, but they have a view of the market, and they originate stories based on their view as well. So let's not, think that all producers or all filmmakers are coming from a very obscure place of their heart that they want to make this film and it's just about themselves. I'm working with people who are like, I've been looking for a project, for example, about Japan, a fascinating story about Japan for years, because I know that Japanese films are very good with the French market, and there is always a hit every year. We are working on another film now that it is a crossover, elevated genre, and they were looking for an elevated genre film because it is a trend with Titanro and these French films and French-speaking films that have been very successful. So what can you do during development? Basically, there are a lot of things that even asking the questions to the people brings them to a position of rethinking. From the choice of title, that is a big thing. Very frequently, from the way that they write their synopsis and logline, to the way the story goes, how much they have to reveal. Also, it can have an impact on the script, like we were discussing yesterday with Mathias, and I don't know what was the conclusion of this discussion. If you make a children's film for 10-year-olds, you can't have a character that is 8, because no 10-year-old will watch a kid younger than their age on screen. They want to look for the older kids. So that might have an influence on the story. These kind of decisions will have an influence that will twist things. It's not going to change the soul of the project or the intention of the director or the intention of the producer, but for sure it will have some influences. And also, packaging is something that, I don't know, like I see more and more people doing more of that. Like they're thinking more about how they will present their project, how it will look on paper, how it will look aesthetically. We make films. I mean, it's not normal that we circulate a synopsis on a piece of paper. It has to be more rich. It has to refer to what the actual film will look like. So this is also work that we do during development, as well as defining audiences, defining benchmarks, defining where these benchmarks have been sold, the distribution strategy that these films had, the festivals these films had, what is the idea of how to build this in the future. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you that with how things are happening now, I don't think that anyone can predict really what will happen to a film exactly. I mean, of course, it's a film, it's an organic thing, and it will, by the time it's made, it will be different, maybe. But I'm not referring to that so much. I'm referring to the fact that by talking to sales agents in the past year, there are also a lot of surprises. Like there are films that were never meant to be for Netflix, and they are. And they are sold like hot cookies, So sometimes you make strategies and you make assumptions, but you really don't know how things are going to go. Mathias, to you.
Yeah, I think you're very right when you say that producers are thinking more and more about marketing at an early stage of development, and I feel like this is, thank God, it's kind of entering more and more into the process. I think it's a very good evolution that we can see. And I mean, what I think is also important to understand is that, you know, you can see I'm quite a good guy, but often when I'm introduced to the director at an early stage of development, the directors are a bit like afraid of meeting the marketing guy. And I also understand that because I feel, you know, what my role is exactly the opposite of the director's role. The director's role at the early stage of development or during development is to make a film as complex as possible, to add as many layers as possible, you know, to mix genres, to be innovative, to kind of add like different things into the film. And, you know, the marketeer's job is actually the opposite in the way that, you know, you need to simplify a film into something that's understandable within 10 seconds, where you say, okay, I want to know more, or no, I don't want to know more. You know, that is what marketing is all about. When you have a poster that's really messy, where you kind of have 7 different elements in the posters that are taking you into different directions, you get lost, you don't want to know anymore, and you just say, no, this film is not for me. So, you know, what we do is that we try to understand, like, you know, I always say that positioning means identifying 3 elements in the film. It can be in the story, but it can also be outside of the story. It can be the director, it can be the cast, it can be where the film was shot, it can be the genre of the film, it can be really a lot of things. And identifying 3 elements and putting them together into, you know, what we call a positioning statement. And that positioning statement becomes basically the spinal bone of the entire like marketing campaign that will come later. You know, then every marketing asset, so the poster, the trailer, the stills, the synopsis, they will all be the translation of, you know, what you have defined as a positioning statement. And so, you know, I mean, to give you very kind of practical advice for those of you who are producers or directors, you know, I would say the first step is really think about your target audience. And I think the best way to do that is to think about one person, because I think if you say female 45 to 60 with a high level of education, it's very abstract. If you say Barbara, 57 years old, you know, the kids have left home, she's a lawyer, she goes to the cinema once a week, she likes these kind of films, she reads these kind of newspapers, she likes her cappuccino, you know, in these kind of bars, then, you know, all of us know a Barbara. And so that will really help us then when we think about like how to write a synopsis for our film, we will all think like, okay, we know Barbara, how to make our film appealing to Barbara. So, you know, that would be the first step. Then the second step is defining the positioning statement. As I said, you know, like identifying 3 elements that will appeal to Barbara. And then, yeah, benchmarking, as you said. So that means like trying to find some similar films and seeing how they have been marketed, how they were marketed, you know, what kind of elements they used to attract the audience. Did it work? Did it not work? I think when you do benchmarking, a lot of time producers and directors I work with tend to go for like very, very big American films. I think that's not really relevant. You know, if you make a film about boxing, choosing Rocky as a benchmark doesn't make any sense. First of all, it's 40 years old, and second, it's you know, the perception of that film crossing the Atlantic to come to Europe is very different from, you know, if you're a Greek filmmaker and you make a film about boxing. So it's about like realistically, and also, I mean, what's really interesting when you do benchmarking is to look for negative benchmarks, so films that didn't do well, films that never found their audience, and trying to understand why they didn't find their audience. And often, you know, some of them are not necessarily bad films, they just didn't really manage to find an audience, and then analyzing that and not making the same mistakes is actually really useful. And if you apply already these 3 very simple steps, you know, you can do that in a couple of hours with a couple of bottles of wine. Normally, alcohol really helps for brainstorming because then you become more creative. And, you know, that's already kind of helping you to set like a basic marketing strategy for the film. Then, of course, if you can spend more time on it, even better. But, you know, that would be like the backbone of it.
Thank you. Stephen?
You see, this is what I find very interesting. If you say, okay, take the notion of a positioning statement and say to a writer and director at the very early stages, okay, not make your marketing positioning statement, because that's not what we're talking about, is the concept of a positioning statement, defining 3 areas in the story that are really important. Now, when you develop, You know, if you said, for example, I'm making a detective story, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, okay, this is what's really important in my story. It's a detective story. If you're making a detective story, there are certain principles under which detective stories work. If you understand and use those principles and play with them, you will be successful in evolving a story that works, that it appeals to people and is interesting to you. If you don't, if you say, I'm going to make a detective story, but I have no idea what a detective story is, and I have no interest in that, then what you're likely to do is make a not particularly interesting story, because you haven't understood the basic principles. Okay, so what I'm interested in, this notion of bringing development and creative people and marketing people together, is take these ideas and say, how would you use that idea in the world that you live in, creatively? Not become a marketing person. What I'm saying is take that principle and explore it differently. What I'm particularly interested in, for example, in this discussion at the moment is the question of at what point does the story go to the audience? You know, because there are many ways you can reach an audience now. At what point do you place your story in the world? Okay, again, in the kind of traditional form, you develop the story to a certain point, and then you start presenting it to certain people in order to get some money to take it to the next stage. And at that point, you don't necessarily show the audience the story. But you can, using social media, show the audience a story at any stage. You know, you can create a social media site and you can start to put the story out there, even if it's just like an image and an idea. Okay, which means if you want to, you can talk to that audience before you finish the project. You can ask them their opinion. You can ask them to vote if you want to. You can offer prizes. You can do whatever you want if you want to debate with the audience what the story is. Now, some stories you don't want to do that with because you know what it is. Other stories might change because of that relationship. You might want to say, what if I build up an audience of 50,000 subscribers on YouTube to my YouTube channel for my story, even though I'm not completely sure yet what the story is? What if I watch that evolution of that site and that relationship with an audience and see how that relationship and those people change the idea of how the story might develop? So it's a dialogue between us and the audience, which we're growing and at the same time listening to and talking. You can do it that way if you like. Now, again, I'm not saying you have to. What I'm saying is the potential for this is here now, and you can do it now, and you can choose at any time to place your story in front of the audience. So rather than saying, well, we have to finish the film in order to put it in front of an audience, the decision when you put the story in front of an audience and how you do that is completely up to you. And as a producer, you might say, when is the most creatively interesting moment to do that? If my story gets in trouble, if I'm developing and it seems to go wrong and we're not quite sure where we are, would it help to put the story in front of an audience at that point and see what happens, see whether their responses make us think, oh, okay, we could do this, we could do that. So we could develop in a different way. I'm not saying you have to. What I'm saying is there's an immense amount of potential and tools and access available to us now that we don't use enough or we don't maybe think about enough. And what if we did, and what kinds of stories would we tell? And would they, some of them, reach audiences in different ways? And I think this, again, is the interesting thing that happens when you bring people who are thinking about the marketing and presentation of the project and the things you have to do, and you bring those ideas earlier in the process. Also, by the way, I think it's interesting for those people to be mixing with those creative people because it will change their ideas too. You know, they will suddenly think, well, what if I took this idea of a story that I've learned from a director or a writer? What if I took that idea, the principle behind it, and applied that to my work in some way? And I would remind everybody, it's great to be here in Greece, that, you know, Aristotle was the first person in the history of culture who started to look at a story and say, hamartia, praxis, mythos, peripeteia, catharsis, all these processes of a story are ways of defining and understanding the story in order to make it explicable to the audience. Aristotle, in Greece, 300 years before Christ, said the purpose of a story is to get an audience interested. That's it. It's not to make the writer clever and rich, and it's about making the audience engage, because the story has to make the audience change and evolve. So this idea of the story having a kind of purpose in relation to the audience is not a marketing idea, it's an Aristotelian idea. Okay, it's the basis of Greek tragedy, and it's always been with us. So it's always there to be explored. It's not a bringing into the arena of the commercial, into the creative. It's a kind of exploration of the full creative potential of the idea of changing an audience, of bringing a story and changing the way they see the world. And it's always been there.
And you talked about, you talked about producers and about they're the ones that bring the different people together, the different threads together. So does that mean that it's a new way of producing, that producing needs to change to bring those people together? And how do you get the creatives with the marketeers together? They've never worked before, so what do you anticipate in that relationship?
Yeah, I don't think producing really needs to change from... I think that what we are describing is already happening for many films. I already told you there are many films that are initiated by producers, or as an idea they are initiated by producers, and then they find the right team around, and a lot of people, and often marketeers come on board and they consult on the basis of what is on the table. But I think the most important thing is that at least producers, I'm not sure if all directors could do it, some could, and writers. I know many directors and writers who would never want to talk to a marketing person. No way. This is my vision, I don't care what you say, I don't care about your opinion, and then, even in these cases, however, for these directors and this producer and these writers, the producer should and could do some marketing thinking before entering production. Even we see things on a weekly or a monthly basis, mistakes. I will call them mistakes because they are there are no stills from the set. There is no thought behind what the poster will look like. The assets that we need to create the poster are not there, and then we have problems, and then we can't create the best representation of the film for an image that represents the film. These are these are things that happen on a very, very often. I'm not going to talk about the title again, because the title is, again, why do you have this title? Oh, it was something in my script 6 drafts ago, but it's not there anymore. Why didn't you change? It doesn't reflect what you're doing anymore. Oh, we never came up with a better title, so that's it. There are a lot of things that, even in the cases that there is a hardcore art house director who wants to do his film, and I totally respect it, there are things that a producer can do to improve its market potential, even though within this circle of distributors and festivals that we are used to working. Now, whether or not a marketeer can work on the story before the story exists, maybe. Maybe a marketeer could say, I've noticed this trend in I don't know, in Sweden, that these kind of films are breaking the box office and they get very good visibility abroad. Why don't you think of it? And this kind of thing, he has created some trends, like the elevated genre in France, like the Nordic noir in Scandinavia. There are these kind of trends because they saw the market potential and then they followed it. But I don't think it can be applied in every project that's out there, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel the anger with the title thing. I feel like we can really feel it. But that's so true, that's so true. And the title is basically the #1 element in marketing, and people don't think about it. Have you said your title out loud? And people, and then you read it out loud, and they're like, oh yeah, actually it sounds shit. Well, yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, no, I'm really with you on that one. But I mean, in my experience, what's quite funny is when I started my company 10 years ago, I thought that most of my clients would be young producers. I kind of imagine that marketing would be something that young producers would be mostly interested in. And I've realized that actually it's the other way around, that the producers who approach me are normally producers who have a bit more experience, who have maybe produced 5, 6 films already. and they've had like a couple of big failures of films that were actually really good films, but just because the marketing was completely wrong, which is like what I would say probably 50% of European films out there don't have a marketing strategy. So that means that basically, they give complete freedom to a poster designer that's normally not a film poster designer because, my sister-in-law, she's really great. No, she's not. Poster design is a job, but hey. And you end up with a sister-in-law who watches the film and she really likes like this and that element. And then the trailer editor, you give complete freedom, so he likes that and that element. And then, the synopsis is written like in 2 minutes by the producer because they have to send it to a festival without even thinking about it. And they put like some things, and then the director is answering interviews where they're talking about what they like in the film. And all these different elements that are playing, for marketing, that are building an image in the head of people, are not going in the same direction, and they're confusing people, and then you end up like being really confused. And if you're confused, you're like, I'm rather gonna go to watch this Hollywood film because that has a really good marketing strategy and I really understand what it's all about. And so, so that's the real problem. There is no thinking, there is no time that is kind of put into marketing. And so, yeah, as I was saying, like my clients nowadays, I realize, are mostly producers with a bit more experience who have realized that, making a good film is not enough. And you need to kind of put a bit of energy into marketing. And sometimes I feel it's so crazy to think that what's the average budget of a feature film in Europe? Around €1 million, maybe something like that. If you put 20,000 euros into marketing, you're going to have a higher marketing budget than 90% of the other European films out there, which out of 1 million should be doable. I find it always funny how, if the editing of the film is not working, you're always going to find a budget to hire a new editor and to kind of redo the editing. But then you're always going to cut the marketing budget. Every producer I know, they always end up cutting the marketing budget. Oh yeah, because we needed this, because we needed that. No, keep it aside, because that's really going to make a difference. So I feel, it's not a question, I don't know, it's really a question of just putting a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, and a little bit of budget into it. And you're always going to be like much stronger than all the other people out there. So yeah, it's quite a small effort.
The anger was there as well with you.
Yes.
Stephen?
I would say, I bet you those projects which have that confusion in which manifests in the marketing stage where, you have a post that's one thing, the director's talking about one thing, the strategy is not going to properly work out. That confusion and lack of clarity, if you trace that back through the history of the project, existed in the development of the project also. Okay, that there has never been a process where there's been a unified understanding by the team of what's critical and essential and important about the story, and later about, because that becomes the project. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. So these disciplines of saying you need that unified understanding of what it is that you have in order that you all, as it were, have a shared notion and a vision of what it is. That's also true of the story. Okay, if you have, the number of projects that, when projects fail in development, and most projects in development do fail, remember, they don't fail because you can't make the story work. You happen to have an idea, and it's that one idea that can never be made into a story. That never happens in development. The reason development projects fail is because the team of people working on it get bored with it. And they start to get bored with each other, and quite often they begin to kind of become less interested in working together because the project just doesn't have the energy that's needed. And the reason it doesn't have the energy within it that's needed is the process by which those people are working together is wrong. It's flawed. Like, it's not the story that's the problem, it's the team that's the problem. They're not working properly. Okay, and 90% of development projects that fail for those reasons. That basically, people get bored with a project. You might see someone after a year, you say, what happened to that project? I really like that idea. And they go, oh, well, I got involved in something else, and it came along, and anyway, my director got a different job, and they went off, and, and it was like, and they don't go, oh, it was a tragedy, I really felt, when they talk about it to you, it's like, oh, well, these things happen, la-di-da. Okay, and that's how they fail, because people don't have a passion and a drive and a unified idea of what they're trying to do. So it's a failure of the process rather than a failure of the story. And this kind of disciplined way of thinking, okay, you've got to be clear about it, you've got to know where you are, is an application of ideas in development too. This is equally true of the story. And if you do that in the early stages, you spread that through to the final stages. It's really about just good practice. And again, there are lessons to be learned at both ends. There's good practice that you can learn from marketing. This kind of discussion, you could take to any development team, 2 years before the project is presented to the world, and you could say, look, do you have this kind of clarity? When you talk about it together, do you have the same idea? Or are you shooting off? Because that shooting off in different directions, when the thing is made, that's going to happen in the marketing and the distribute. That lack of clarity is going to manifest, and the audience is going to go, I don't know what this is. Exactly the same way when you read me your project, I go, at the early stages, I don't know what this is. I see some characters, I see a situation, I see a plot that's half this, half that. I don't know what it is. And in development, we have to find out what it is and we make it clear for everyone else coming along later. So it's the same principles. That's why I think it's interesting to bring these kind of people together and see what happens when you kind of debate different processes in the early stages to see whether it's beneficial. And as Vicky was saying, for some people, they don't need that. Some filmmakers, some creatives don't need to do that at all because they have that kind of clarity and that idea. And others can benefit from it and will enjoy doing that. And we'll see what happens. We'll explore that together. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of process. It's something you explore for yourselves and find out what works for you and what's useful and what you can use.
Yeah, if I can add something to this, it's one actually really interesting exercise, I think, to do when, the film is still in development, is to actually write like 3, 4, 5 different synopses for the film. Are you going to focus just on one protagonist, or are you going to take the whole family as a protagonist? Are you going to market the film mostly on the inner conflict of your character? Are you going to mostly market it on outer things that are happening to them? All these kind of things. There are really different ways of writing a synopsis for a film. And then if you write 4 or 5 different synopses and then you show them to the director, to the producer, and you say, which one is your synopsis? And that can be sometimes a good way of realizing that the producer and the director are not at all making the same film, and then you end up seeing them kind of fight a little bit and things. But in general, it's a very easy exercise, but it's a great exercise to do because, it's really a way of kind of anticipating the marketing and understanding how, the audience could perceive the films and stuff like that.
Yes, and Stephen, could you maybe talk a little bit about how the program will actually be structured? And it's going to be project-based? Apart from the marketeers, what other type of professionals are going to be involved, and when the sessions are?
Very, very, very briefly, the website will be kind of open and for applications kind of the beginning of next year. So January, February. So, but very briefly, what S2M is a program. So it's not an individual kind of event. It takes place over a number of months, and it involves a number of different elements. And what people are looking to work with are kind of teams working on projects together, which can be any kind of combination, but we're really, broadly speaking, writers, directors, and producers. That can be one person, a writer, director, producer, of course. But we're looking really for teams that have a project together. Now, the project can come at any stage, but I think it's more interesting and useful people normally that a project is at an early stage. And we're perfectly happy if it's a very early stage. So this is a kind of exploratory process and development for us. And alongside those teams who come with their projects, we also have a different kind of participant who is anyone who wants to, as we explore kind of development from this kind of marketing perspective, who wants to stand back, doesn't necessarily have a project, but maybe working and marketing themselves, and might want to explore and find out more about development as a process, and the relationship between development and the job of marketing and sales. Or if, for example, a producer would like to come because they want to upgrade their own skills in this area without necessarily bringing a project, that's also possible. You can come at it from that perspective. So we have these kind of 2 groups of people, the marketeers, if you like, we call them that, and the kind of the creative teams. And The centerpiece of the program is a kind of residential workshop, which will happen in Lesbos in the middle of the year. But before that, there are a number of online elements, which are introduction for the teams, introduction to marketing, introduction to developments. And these are very practical kind of online modules, which look at specific ways of taking your project through a series of steps, your idea through a series of steps, which are just different ways of asking questions about it, so that you start to interrogate that kind of process. When you come to the residential workshop, we have a number of experts from around the world, in person and coming in online for particular sessions. And the project goes through an intense development process, a workshop, and it's very experimental. There's a thing to understand. There will be virtually no writing in that workshop. So we're not saying you have an idea, you're going to write a treatment and an outline, a treatment. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be much more about making presentations to the group, talking about, making all sorts of different kinds of presentations, not written. So you're not saying we're going away to write. It's actually about thinking about the story and coming back and making a presentation, for example, as a piece of theatre. So, okay, if your story was a play, I want you to make a 5-minute play about your story. Just pick any one thing in the story that you're interested in and make a play of it. Make a photo montage using images taken off the internet of what the story is, which only tells the audience the atmosphere, not the story, but the atmosphere and the shifts in atmosphere as the story evolves. So there are lots of different ways of exploring the story, asking different kinds of questions. Once that workshop is done, you have all these different ideas. We then go away, and there's a kind of a serious and detailed kind of development process, which is much more conventional, where you will write your outlines, where you will write your treatment. And along the way, there's specific, detailed training about the process of writing these kinds of documents. How do you write an outline? How do you write a logline? How do you write a synopsis? How do you go through these kind of stages in detail? So that, and this is for everybody, so that you can understand the kind of discipline of writing these kinds of documents. But fed into that is also the marketing questions that you ask. How do you think about your project in terms of marketing? What are the kinds of questions you'll be asking? What are the kinds of things you need to know? And you'll be mentored through that process by a marketing consultant and a story consultant. So that will be ongoing. At the end of that process, you then have a developed kind of, if you like, project package. And then we will select some of those projects to come here to the Agora and be presented at the festival in the Agora next year. So the target is to be coming back here and to present that project, that developed thing at that stage to the industry for, again, a critical response, to see what the response that you get from the industry. So that's, in essence, that's what it is. When you look on the website, the program will be described in a lot more detail, so you'll get a detailed sense of what it is. And I would encourage everyone to have a look at the website early next year.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So we can open up to questions now. We welcome, especially from filmmakers and directors. Yes, please. Oh, do I? Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I would ask Stephen. You said that this deliberation of boundaries between genres, or what exactly length, or it's a short story, is a fiction story, or is it deliberates the creator. So you put in the middle not the story but the process, if I understand, isn't it? But when you do an experiment like device theater that you improvise and the story comes after, you need a lot of money for that. Cinema is not so flexible in improvisation. Maybe you think that also the social media perception of things, that we can shoot everything with our mobile or putting it on YouTube, it's a manner to the creating process also? and it liberates the pores we need that we create something? Is this a way to move?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think I've done I spent 20 years in development and 20 years working with writers and directors and producers, 20 years working with text and script and writing and reading and writing and reading and discussing and reading and writing. And that's kind of the heart of the process. And with any project, at a certain point, for everything else you have to do, you have to come to that. You know, at one point you do have to come to text. If only in short documents. You don't necessarily have to come to script straight away. But I think the other questions are absolutely that in a way that, we've devised. I mean, theatre's a really good example. Because you say, well, it's expensive, but in fact, in some ways, it isn't for theatre. You can get a room and get 6 people in a room, and you can spend a day, and that room can be, in your house, and you can do it for very little. Now, obviously, to do it properly, you need proper money, but you can do that initial work for really very nothing and very little. And I think what I'm interested in, as well as doing the way we have always done, is bringing these different processes, to the development table. And for example, in the workshop, the residential workshop we talk at the centre, there's no point in bringing people from all over the world into one place and have them all sit in rooms writing. They can do that at home, and they can do that on the internet and talk to each other in Zoom meetings. So if you're going to bring people together, what do you get from bringing people together that you can't do on Zoom, and in meetings? And that's about. What you can do is you can make people work very fast. You can create a kind of experimental hothouse atmosphere, and you can throw questions at them and forms at them and say, do it with pictures, do it with, acting, do it in poetry, do it with music, do it in interpretive dance, whatever it is. Within that, things will happen, and certain things, I've noticed this with stories, the pillar of the story, the thing that whatever representation you make of it, certain things stand out, and the audience that you show it to, they just notice 1 or 2 things. And those 1 or 2 things they notice are often not what the creators concentrate on when they think about it. And then when you present it in front of an audience, suddenly you get this response, which is, hey, that's really interesting. And the whole audience normally agrees. It's not something that we have lots of disagreement. The audience all goes, that's the most interesting thing about your story. And very often the creators go, I hadn't really thought about it as that. Now, in the early process of development, suddenly to get an audience of 10 people who all go, that's what's interesting, okay? Now, any good writer or director or producer will pay attention to that, okay? And they'll go, why did they get so interested? What is it? And what do I do about that? And then you can repeat that process. This is what the residential is about, and it'll start to shift and shape the project. It doesn't change it too much. It's still, whatever you want to do is what you do, but suddenly you begin to see ways of moving it, and it becomes an interesting kind of experiment. Then you go away and you write. That doesn't stop, but you write after you've gone through that kind of process, and you are rigorous in your writing and the craft that you use to do that. That doesn't go away.
Okay, let me introduce myself. We are from the Pitching Club of Drama. I'm Barbara Dukas. I have a theater background, and I'm very, very impressed with your presentation. And we do that 8 years in drama. We work with improvisation and with play on titles. We begin the first day playing the titles. We change the titles, and we say to each other, what do you think this is the title is Lullaby? What do you think this film is? And they write without knowing the synopsis. We do it for 10 or 15 projects, short film, after selection of 150 from all over the world. But the problem is, when this happens for 1 week in drama, it's okay, it ends with a pitching presentation, a physical presence with the person improvise his project to producers. The problem is when you finish that, that's why I'm interested of your structure, how you continue that in days of COVID also, with Zoom, with exchange papers. Or you continue it also on Zoom by improvisation. That's my question.
Yeah,
it depends.
Again, the exact process is for each team and each mentor to kind of work out exactly how they will do it. But the idea is it's an intense kind of development process online afterwards, which does involve strong traditional elements, like you have to write a synopsis of the story. We have to work that through. We have to clarify the idea. You might come away from the workshop with all sorts of fantastic ideas, but then in the weeks after, you go, okay, sit down. How does that translate into a piece of work? You still have to write a script. You still have to have an outline you can show the industry. You still have to have a script that you can write that will make actors get interested in the story. So you can't go to the actors and go, I've got these wonderful ideas. You're going to present it as a written form. So the discipline of development comes after that kind of creative workshop, and you then start, and again, the discipline of marketing is, okay, what have you got? How would this sell? What kind of story is it? What are the elements that you're going to be able to put together? How do you make those kind of packages we're talking about from this story? And those questions are also being asked all the way through that process. So in the online element afterwards, and online is, just talking on Zoom. If we were in a different world, we'd all be sitting together. You'd find different ways of doing it. When we do that process, it's really about applying principles and ideas that we know have worked for 50 years on the same process. So it's a mixture of the two, and both are disciplined in their own ways.
And it's a 1 year process?
It's about kind of 8 months, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen.
There's someone at the back there with a question.
Hi. You talk about introducing a project early on, even from the development stage, to the audience and to your targets. However, we know that if a project has too much visibility over a course of time, it's very quickly going to be considered old and it gets burned. So these two ideas are contradicting to me. Could you explain a little more on them?
Both of you. Okay. I'm gonna basically agree with you. I think it completely depends on the project. I think it's that's exactly part of the marketing strategy. Is this a project that would benefit from kind of building an audience early on or not? At which stage are you? How long is it going to take you? I mean, I remember, for example, we worked on a film called Touch Me Not that ended up winning the Golden Bear at Berlinale, quite unexpectedly, I have to say. That film had been pitched for 7 years around, it went to Torino Film Lab, it did every possible lab, blah, blah, blah. Everyone was so bored of that project that, it still ended up winning the Golden Bear, so that's not too bad, in terms of, but I think that project, for example, suffered from being overexposed, and I think that wasn't necessarily, I mean, here I'm talking, of course, B2B, I'm talking within the industry, the audience had no clue that project existed. I think that's really something to think about. The other thing, I mean, I work in social media, so I will always say that, going on social media is a good idea, but when is a good idea to go on social media? And I feel, for example, for some films that are very, very depending on, the A festival premiere, sometimes having a presence on social media before that can be a bit dangerous, because basically if you say, it's a wrap, we just finished post-production, you're telling the world, we have just finished our film. So then everyone knows that you will be applying to Cannes, let's say that happens in February or March. So that means, Cannes said no, Venice said no, Locarno said no, San Sebastian said no, they're probably going to try Berlinale, even Rotterdam said no. It's for the reputation of the film, you're actually damaging your film. So, these are all things that you need to think about and to take into consideration. But there are other films, like, for example, documentaries, where, if you go on social media early on, it's really smart. You're really building an audience for yourself. And then you're going to get really brand ambassadors that are going to be fighting for your film, that are going to be talking about your film around them, and that are going to be bringing, people to watch your film and stuff like that. So it really depends on the film. It depends. This is something to think about. This is something to consider. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think for some films it can be damaging.
I also think it depends on the genre of film also. If you're talking about horror, for example, online, there is a huge community of horror fans, and they're very, very skilled and specialized. and they're extremely interested, not just in individual stories, but also in individual films, but also in the process of, the sequences within them. If you want to go online and you want to find out how to shoot a scene where a man cuts his fingers off with an axe and how to do that, there are endless tutorials on how to do that, how to make the effect work. So the horror audience is extremely literate and extremely enthusiastic. Now, the question about with a horror film, you might want to generate the enthusiasm and excitement about your story early on in order to create a kind of an interest in it, which then that community talks to the horror festivals, for example. So if there's a kind of buzz that you create with the audience because of something about your story, which you release early, then you can actually have those members, that community, will start emailing and messaging the festival saying, are you taking that film? Have you heard about this film? It's a much more democratic community, the horror fan enthusiast community, than many others. So there's an argument for, depending on what kind of story you're thinking of making, you might want to say, okay, well, if I can create the excitement about this film, that will help put pressure on festivals, horror festivals in particular, to take the still. And this happens, again, I've done this with feature films before. You create a kind of interest. It's not a kind of, again, a one-fits-all kind of way of doing things. It works in different ways. Different stories.
I'm sorry for the dialogue thing. I just wanted to add, yes, but in this, how do you keep an interest in the course of 2-3 years that it takes the story to be created?
In my opinion is that if you go out on social, like we are developing the project, by the time you release, nobody cares anymore. Nobody. It's like you don't have enough material to sustain these accounts for all this time. People are like, let's do it now, or in my opinion, for most films, unless you have a documentary that is a very specific. For example, I think you worked as well on a documentary called The Scars of Ali Boulala. We did the trailer, an amazing film. And Ali Boulala is like a legend of skateboarding. So he had a huge fan base. Skateboarding fans are like also very passionate about it. So that made sense to say we are making a film early on, because he was who he was and he had all these people following. But if you are making a feature film, whatever, my opinion is you start communication a few weeks before you enter a festival. Like I also see a lot of people like the day before Berlinale announces they are trying to fix things, No, you do it a few weeks before. You have a core fan base, your crew, your people, your whatever. You invite a few people on the page, and the time Berlinale is out, your accounts are out, your social media handles are out, and that's the spotlight for the film, like the lineup announcement. It will get as much publicity as audience outreach as possible, and that is when you do it. Now, I'm working on a children's film at the moment as a producer, and as a bit of as a consultant, but okay. And the goal is the moment we have a story, the moment we have some sort of idea how the thing is, to go out to children and talk to them, to have like a workshop, to invite 15 children. That's a different thing. It's going to be behind closed doors. We will tell them the story. We will see how they react, our target audience. It's a very fragile target audience. It changes between 8 and 10, 10 to 12. There are big changes in children. So this is what we are going to do, and that's also part of marketing. But it's not about going out to the world and saying, hey, in 4 years we will be shooting this film that will be released in 7 years, and then pay attention to it. No, nobody cares. People make the decision which film to watch mostly the day they are going to the cinema. Of course, you raise awareness meanwhile, and if they don't know of your film, they will not watch it. But that's when the core decision is being made. That's it.
We have a question there.
Hello, my name is Manolis. I was just skeptical about what you said about the film that you presented Tuesday. So I thought immediately, okay, so what are you trying to do is to simplify the idea and find innovative ways of how can we take this one step further and introduce the advertising concept before even the script starts. I find this in a way problematic from a creator's perspective, because before starting a project, what you need is to have an initial goal. I mean, something so, deep inside your heart that you want to make this project and get involved for the next 5 years of your life. And you will never stop. You don't have to quit. Now, imagine if someone else enters in that particular period, which is very important, and in a way adds a concept so that the strategy of the advertising will make sense. In my head, this doesn't work exactly. Also, specifically on the Tuesday, I thought this could be catastrophic production-wise. I mean, why can't you create the concept later and say, we shot this film every Tuesday? It's a lie. But the film is a lie itself. I mean, everybody needs storytelling. We all fall in love with it because we want to believe into a lie. So it could happen after and not shoot the film every Tuesday, because that means you will rent 52 times the camera and then return it. It doesn't work. And
sorry.
The concept defeats the purpose,
sorry,
I wrote.
One second. That's what they did.
Okay.
They did that.
That's good.
Okay, so
they rented and they gave it back.
Yes, and no, they owned the camera. They bought the camera for the year. They bought it. But this is actually how the film was made. They made it every Tuesday. They wrote it on the Thursday. They rewrote it on the weekend. They rehearsed it on the Monday. They shot it on the Tuesday. They cut it on the Thursday, and they started again for a year.
Okay. It sounds like a nightmare from the perspective of a filmmaker. But again, I mean, I couldn't debate. If you told me that we shot it every Tuesday, how do I know that it's right or wrong? I mean, you could lie and I would buy it.
The reason they did that was not for marketing. The reason they did that was because they were interested in the creative experiment of what happened to a story if you do it that way. So it was a creative reason. It wasn't a marketing reason. Yeah, absolutely, you could lie and you could say this film was shot, blah, blah, blah.
No, but you explained that the concept, because it is a concept-based film, okay? And it's easy to sell to producers. You can explain it in one sentence, because you have this can apply probably in concept-based films. It couldn't apply to everyone. That's one of the notes that I wrote.
Yeah, I'm not saying it should apply to everyone.
No.
You say you have to have an idea that's a passion for you for 5 years. No, you don't. If you want to do that, you can. If you want to make a film because you want to use some dice and you throw it up in the air, you can do that too. It's a free world. There's not one way of doing this. I'm not saying everyone should do it the way I want to do it or that we want to do it.
Yeah,
it's just there are different ways of doing it.
And I didn't say that you also said only one example, but I'm judging the example. And the other thing is that I wrote that, form does not follow function. So the necessity of making a film does not give the question to be answered. We start in the other way around. We start with the outcome. How do we want the advertising of the film to be applied on the film itself without having the core idea in the beginning, which I thought this might be a postmodern thing. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All I would say is I completely agree. I'm not saying that, there is one way of doing it. This idea, this program is a provocation. It's an experiment, and it's looking to bring together people who haven't necessarily worked together in that way, in that form before. Out of that will come interesting ideas. I've done this before in different places, and it's not just interesting ideas. Out of that come films that have accelerated the careers of the filmmakers enormously. They have gone from people who have made nothing to people who have successful films with international sales and international premieres and television sales, and they've gone from really nowhere in terms of their local industry to different place in terms of the international industry. So they've jumped kind of 8 years or 9 years of work into 2 or 3 years. Not all of them. Some of them fail completely. But then many films fail completely. But the ones that succeeded in an extraordinary way. so there is an upside to it. I mean, you could look at the film and say, well, you know, you're not sure about it. That film won Best Director's Prize at Sundance for International Films and won Silver Bear at Berlin and 5 other festivals and has been seen in 30 territories. This is from a team of people who had never made a feature film in their lives before in a part of Australia that no one is interested in. Okay, so you see what I mean? It can have these effects, and that wasn't the only one. There were others also. I can name you the others. So it's really about, you know, asking these questions and doing it, trying it in different ways. And if honestly you don't like the idea of that, that's fine, because I really cherish the films that people make with a kind of commitment for themselves, and they don't want to get involved in that. They don't want to ask those questions. Those films are special and magnificent, and it would sadden me if those films disappeared and those stories disappeared. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, let's do others. Let's explore. Let's see what the implications are. Because things are changing, you know, and they're changing quickly. And, you know, we can be part of that discussion and debate, and we can be part of the exploration of what the new directions can be. And some directions will fail, and some will be successful. And that's really all that we're talking about, is let's do this and see what happens. You know, I'm pretty confident we will have some successes. I know we will. And I'm pretty confident we'll have some failures. But that will be true of anything else too. You know, it's part of the process of filmmaking and exploring ideas. Not all ideas in development go all the way through. You know, most of them will fail. So I'm just saying, let's fail in more interesting ways as well as succeed, and see what happens.
Thank you. We have a question at the back.
Hello. You guys were talking a little bit about the kind of maybe not so gradual move toward streaming platforms in the digital space. And I am interested in talking a little bit about the experiential elements of cinema. And we're talking a lot about story, but, you know, we're at a film festival, it's a physical space, and cinema is often seen in a physical space. And I feel in the last 10 years, the industry has kind of maybe started sprinting toward putting everything out in the digital space. And I think the interaction with cinema in that space is different than something that's in a sound design or in a museum or something. So I'm curious to hear you guys at all 3 of these levels. I think are interesting to think about the experiential parts of cinema, and is it going away? Do you guys consider that when you're talking about developing stories? Yeah.
Shall I start? You know, the reason why I'm doing my job and why I'm sitting here is because when I was a teenager, I was going to the cinema, and, you know, that was my window on the world, and it made me, it was literally my window on the world, you know, and it literally changed my life. So I'm completely with you. I think I still do believe in, you know, the experience of watching a film on a big screen, and I think it's very impressive, you know. We work more and more on films, you know, we kind of do social media promotion for a film when it's launching at a festival. And so, you know, we watch the film, let's say 2 months before the festival, and then we prepare the social media campaign. And I feel what happens in the room at the moment of the world premiere of the film, the first time that film meets an audience, is something that's so special and so unique, and that tells you so much about the future career of the film. And it's impressive. I'm not going to make names, obviously, for the negative examples. There's this one film we're working on in Cannes that I really loved when I watched it on my small screen, and then when we watched it in a cinema, nothing happened. It fell flat. I don't know why. It's really hurtful to think about it, because it really touched me when I watched it alone, and then in the cinema it completely fell flat. And then there's another film that we worked for in Locarno that was a very subtle comedy, and, you know, I smiled 3 times when I watched the film on my small screen, and in a cinema people were laughing out loud, and there is really something magical that happened. So yeah, absolutely. I think we should all, and I hope we all, fight for films to still be seen on big screens. I think that the reality of the market today is that it's cruel, you know, it's horror. Like nowadays films are like in cinemas, if you can keep your film in a cinema for 2 weeks, you know, we're working on like releases at the moment. I think it's like a butchery, you know, like films are just coming, they're being like chopped and they're being thrown. So that's also something to keep in mind. And, you know, of course, platforms just give access to so many more people. What I think, where I think platforms are really great is that they allow films you know, that wouldn't have a chance to go into theatrical release because they're too much for a niche audience to actually meet an audience. So, you know, I think for genre films, for like certain types of LGBT films, for, you know, these kind of films that wouldn't necessarily like get access to such a big audience, I think that's where, you know, it really makes a difference. But at least for me, I will keep fighting for the big screen because that's what I love.
Yeah, it's clear that some films that are very niche have opportunities to be seen that they didn't have before. That's a good thing for me. At the same time, there are films that would have theatrical, and they decided against it, and they went to a streaming platform because the money can be insane if a film fits their criteria and they want it. So for these kind of films, I totally understand from a producer's perspective that going on a platform, I would do it for sure if somebody was throwing 2 million at me for a film. And otherwise, I would be able to do like some theatrical that would never reach this kind of number. But at the same time, we also have to think about how, as filmmakers, as marketeers, and as producers, how all the streamers are marketing the films that we are making, which I believe is totally bad. Because as a consumer, I don't know what to watch on these platforms. As a consumer and a lover of art house, and well, I say cinephile, not art house, it's very difficult to find the films. So as a producer, if I had a film on Netflix, I would be very happy for the money. But if you don't have any theatrical, if you don't have the festivals, you don't have any PR around the film, it ends up somewhere in the algorithm. People cannot find it. They have very weird labeling. So, you know, it's not always like, you can't exclude festivals, you can't exclude theatrical totally, at least festivals. Even Netflix, they realize that they need them. Because otherwise the films are somewhere in this space between a documentary about a serial killer and some, you know, funny American comedy, and then there's a film that was in Cannes, and what's there, you know? Like, it's very weird. That's my opinion.
I mean, I think this is an interesting implication for filmmakers generally. Just talk about the streamers for a while. Have been working on a project for a year or so now. People really like this project all around kind of the industry to see it, and there's, you know, a very good chance that the streamers will be interested in it. If the streaming company picks it up, Netflix or whoever, and Netflix is one of the primary possibilities, they have already told the producer that the reason that they give films theatrical release is because they think they might win awards, and that's it. Okay, so the decision they will make on this project is, if we think this project has the chance of winning awards, we will give it a theatrical life, which will also involve a festival life. They will try and place it in that way, and then they will get awards for it, and that will help with the, you know, the profile of the project. But if they don't think that it will has the potential for those awards when they see the cut, okay, then they won't give it that release. It'll go straight to Netflix. Okay, which means, if you think about what that means in terms of, you know, if streamers are getting increasingly, as they are, involved in the financing, picking up with these projects, think about the experience of going to the cinema for the audience. Okay, because they're seeing a lot of films that come from the streamers that the streamers have decided are going to be award-winning films, or they're going to try and push them for awards. So those films are going to have a kind of distinction and an identity, and they're going to be special event films as far as Netflix or Amazon or whoever it is that's making those, that's financing those films. If you're making a film to go into those cinemas, okay, the audience is going to get used over the next 4 years, for example, at seeing a steady stream of powerful, well-financed, event-independent films. Okay, if you're talking about independent cinema. Now, if you're not one of those films with a streamer, your audience is getting used to that's the kind of film you see in the cinema. Okay, so then I would have to question, what happens if your film is quiet? You know, what if it's not necessarily a big event story? You know, that a streamer would go, oh yeah, we can win awards with this, so we'll give it a life in the cinema. What about those films? Does the habit of your audience is going to be watching more and more of those kinds of stories? Do they start to judge your film as failing because it doesn't kind of do what those films do? Now, if you say, well, you know, what do you mean? I would suggest doing an experiment, which I did years ago when I started working in British Screen. I was the head of development at the National Film Agency. I went to watch 20 Hollywood movies in a row without watching any European movies. Okay, so over 10 days, I watched 20 Hollywood films. And then I went to watch a European movie. Okay, and this is what I did in the cinema. Go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. That's what you do. Now, because the films you watch in the cinema determine your responses to the other films you watch in the cinema. So if we have, this is my question about, you know, streamers and independent movies, if those are the films they're putting in independent cinemas because they're the event films, and you watch mostly those, and then you see a non-event film because it's not funded by the streamer, will you sit there and go, make it more special, make it more special, make it more special? And I think that's an interesting question that I think is going to be more important in the coming years, because I think this is going to be an issue in the kinds of films that people feel they can finance for the cinema.
Also, if I can add one thing about Netflix, I think it's very fascinating. You know, I've had Netflix for 2 years now. I think their algorithm is shit. I mean, honestly, I watch very specific type of things. I watch art house stuff and I watch gay stuff, basically. And they keep giving me like American rom-coms and sci-fi series. I'm like, can you not get me? Like, it's kind of not that difficult to get, you know? Like, it's kind of, and so I have to say I don't understand why the algorithm is so weak. But well, that's my problem with it.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. This gives me a great pass because I am Hermione, by the way. I work in film marketing. And I have a question about audience design, which is something that came across to me in many conversations that I had also with other film marketeers, but with sales agents as well. All the data that we have at this point from Creative Europe are outdated because the last report was in 2012. And 2012 to 2021 is completely different world. So we don't know how to access new audiences because, for example, silver audience, which was thriving before in France and Germany, won't go to the cinemas as much often as they used to because they are afraid of COVID. And I like the example for the girl that likes cappuccinos, and I'm trying to be as more personalized as I can when I design an audience, but I would really like some more input on that from you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I will challenge you on the term audience design. That was a term that was invented by Torino Film Lab 10 years ago. And for me, I prefer to talk about marketing. I think you don't design an audience. The audience is there, and then you identify the audience. But anyway, that was the first point. Yeah, I think we base a lot of our strategies on that research that you're probably talking about, that report from the EU from 2012, where they kind of divided audiences, film audiences according to their social media use and the kind of films they like, and that is a very precious research, and I think it's a bit of a shame they haven't kind of updated it. I agree with you. I think that's also, I mean, an advice for everyone here in the room. I mean, Facebook, from that point of view, is really great to do a bit of audience research. I have to say, whenever we work on films, we always start there. I mean, basically what you can do on Facebook is that you can do fake advertising campaigns. You don't need to actually spend money, but you pretend that you want to do advertising. And then you can select like the whole of Greece, women over 25, and then you can say how many of these are interested in basketball. And Facebook will give you that number. And that is a really great way of knowing, like, you know, if you're unsure like how to position your film and you want to know like if you should position it more as a kind of a, you know, feminist film or more as a human rights film, you can do a bit of research through Facebook, and that will give you like rough numbers. Of course, it's not like hiring a proper market research company that will do that market research, but at least it can give you some rough ideas of, like, you know, the type of audiences that can be more interested in certain topics and stuff like that. So that's normally where we start. And then I think it's also, I mean, marketing for me is not a science. So it's not like there's one right target audience for the film. You know, whenever we get hired to work to create a marketing strategy for a film, we always do it in 2 steps. We do a first step where we kind of say what we think is the best for the film, and then we present it to the director or the producer. We talk with them, and we also challenge our own decisions. We also say, hey, but maybe we could go for a younger target audience. Would you feel more comfortable with that? You know, so for me, it's not about like, this is the right target audience for a film. Barbara is the right person for the film. It's more like, that we make something that's coherent. If we decide that our target audience is Barbara, 57 years old, I don't want to have a poster that's designed for 25 years old. And if we decide that our target audience is going to be Samantha, who's 25 years old, then I don't want, you know, so that's the most important for me.
I have nothing to add to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think consistency is key, and it is really lacking. It's really lacking because exactly what you said before, the producer has her best friend was a designer, and then we hire the film editor to edit the trailer, and then our intern does social media because they are very good with social, and then, you know, you have a poster that is describing a horror film, a trailer that is describing, I have a real film in mind, I don't know if you're guessing which one, and then it's an art house, and then you watch the film and you're like, what was that? And you didn't expect any of that from the materials. But yes, about research, I thought that research was a little bit more recent. I thought it was from 14, it's from 12, that research of me. Yeah, okay, so we need to tell them.
Any other questions? One at the back.
Hi, sorry, me again. So there was a comment before about the change in audiences and, sorry, and the preferences and how to target them. On that, how does that translate to B2B marketing? How can we keep up with targeting buyers with films as sales or as producers? What has changed and what are the characteristics?
So I think the film industry is very fascinating. It's very, very different from a lot of other markets. You know, in lots of other markets, the intermediaries are just interested in what the audience is interested in. So that means, you know, if you want to sell shampoo, if the audience loves your shampoo, all the shops are going to buy your shampoo. The film industry is not like that. You know, most distributors and exhibitors, when we talk about the art house world, you know, the studios and the big commercial ones is a different world. But if we talk about the art house world, most distributors and exhibitors are working out of passion, and a lot of them are aging. I mean, it's very fascinating, I think, how, you know, if you meet exhibitors, like art house exhibitors, like Europa Cinema and stuff like that, a lot of them have like quite gray hair / white hair. So these people are not at all thinking like in terms of market terms. So whenever you're marketing a film, you always need to think twice. You need to think about like the B2B marketing, how to market your film to the industry, and the B2C marketing, how to market to the audience. And it can be, sometimes it's similar, but sometimes it's very different. And what I would say about B2B marketing, so marketing to the industry is really, you really need to think in terms of unique selling points. What makes your film unique? Those people have seen everything out there, and so they want things that are unique, you know? Whereas the audience doesn't care because they haven't seen everything that's out there. And if you come with a documentary about Balkan music that's good, they haven't seen the other 2 documentaries about Balkan music that were released in the past 2 years, so they don't care, and they're still going to watch your film. But the festivals and stuff are not going to be interested because they wait, you know. So it's just, I think, in terms of B2B marketing, I think nothing has changed. Like really, literally nothing has changed. I think it's still the same as it was 20 years ago. Or 40 years ago. It's really like kind of, yeah, what makes your film unique and how to kind of present it to those people who are real cinephiles to kind of, you know, show the film, prove to them that the film is kind of special and unique and bringing something new to the film industry, and that will convince them. That's my experience there.
Yeah, I agree with most and with all, actually. I think the biggest problem, I don't know if we can say that this is B2B marketing, but it should be, is between festivals and audiences. I think this is the biggest. You know, like what the festival selects and what the audience, I mean, depending on the festival. There are festivals that are very much like with the audience in mind, but there are several others that the festival programmers basically want to leave their mark, they want to make their statement, they have their editorial line, and c'est ça. So there are many festivals that at the end of the day they select a film that we know that the time it gets the selection, nobody, very few people will be interested in buying it and selling it. So I don't know how this works, but it does.
Yeah, the only thing I would say to that is that it seems to me that given the increasing necessity, particularly for festivals to have, it's no longer simply enough to be good. You know, it can get you through, but if you're making really good work, the next question I think is always part of it, which is to do with Mathias is saying, is also distinction. Okay, it's really good, but it also has a distinct identity as a story, as a project. And that's something, again, that I think you need to be thinking about from the very earliest. I think it's a good question to ask in development. You know, if you're making a romantic comedy, well, why? You know, because there are too many already. Okay, so what makes this mean anything? You know, and that question in the very early stages of a story is a question that will be applied later on. This kind of distinction, this identity issue is, I think, it's important. It has been important, and it's increasingly important. The other thing I would say is that, you know, this gap between festivals and festival films and, as it were, the popular audience. It's a, you know, again, it's a distinct thing. I've worked on so many films that have been picked up and have a useful festival life and a non-existent life after that. Okay, and it seems to be like a, you know, and that can, and then I'm interested in obviously helping people make his films as good as possible, but also what are the things you need to have that kind of festival life that will then help to give you the life after the festival. And again, and what are those things, and how early in the process do you start thinking about what those things are and bringing them to as a part of your consideration?
Any other questions? Oh, there.
Well, I'm just about to finish a film as a producer about a deaf girl, she can't hear, so she speaks in sign language, on a Greek island called Chios. So I can immediately see two communities. One is the deaf community, and the other is the people of the island, who are 55,000 people. Okay, and then 55,000 is the population of the island, and they will be excited about this film shot on their island. And then I suppose that I can move out to a greater community, having this as a center. The question is, that will take about 2 years, okay? And the film will succeed or not succeed, find its way to the audiences. What do you do with that community? So you have collected, say, 30,000 likes around a film called Valmira, all right? What do you do with them? Do you keep feeding them with information when the real reason why you created that community was to promote your film? And yeah, how sustainable and how also ethical and doable is that? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess this is for me. I mean, how ethical, maybe let's start with the last question. How ethical is purely, I mean, you set your own ethics. I think the ethics of marketing is a real question, you know, because somehow you have to choose certain elements of the film that you will be highlighting in the marketing, and that will never be completely honest to the film. So, you know, you say, oh, if, for example, if you make a film that's not very good, do you still market it well, or do you not market it well? You know, like all these kind of things. I think they're very interesting questions. I think in this case, it's very ethical. I don't see any issue personally, because, you know, if you're building a community, you're telling them like the kind of film that you're making, what it's about, like, and you feel like they can have interest in it, and then you inform them when the film is actually released and available. Great. I think they are happy, you are happy, everyone is happy. Does it really make sense? Well, that's a real question. You know, it depends like who's doing it, how much money you're investing, how much time you're investing, you know, and could that time be invested in other marketing means that would bring you more audience or that would bring you more visibility, whatever your ultimate goal is. I have to say, I feel a few years ago, I mean, things have really changed on social media. You know, I feel like 5, 6 years ago, it was much easier to build a community. People were following and liking much easier, and in particular on Facebook. And so I think it was relatively easy to build like a community of thousands of people. Nowadays, because of the changes within Facebook, of how it works, you need to spend money to build a community like that. You can't do it for free anymore. And Facebook is really like dying. I feel like everything has kind of moved to Instagram nowadays, and Instagram is working in a different way, because on Instagram, you know, you need to publish a photo if you want to create a post, and you're not gonna have, you know, 200 photos so that you can publish 1 per week, or let's say 2 per week for like 2 years. Yeah, that's 200 photos. So so it is becoming like harder and harder to actually kind of build these kind of communities over time, and then, you know, have like 30,000 followers at the time of the release that you can turn into brand ambassadors and that are going to be bringing people to the cinema and stuff like that. Where I think what's very interesting, what you're saying, and I think where there is real potential is when you're talking about that island and a place. I think, you know, if you build a community around a place, then, you know, that is something that really makes a lot of sense, because that community is also a real community in real life. And so I think there is a real chance of actually that turning into real viewers who will come to the cinema. If it's purely a community, you know, if those 30,000 followers are spread all around the world, it's going to be much, much harder to actually kind of, you know, turn them into eyeballs who will see your film. If they're all living on one island, that means that, you know, once you organize a few screenings on the island, the people will go to a cinema and watch it. So I think, I mean, you have a film that's very, very adapted for social media, and so therefore it makes sense. Now, when to start, that's the real question. Does it make sense to do it for 2 years, or should you just prepare a lot of stuff during the shoot, and then you actually start like a few weeks before the festival premiere, as Vicky was suggesting earlier?
I'm working on a documentary at the moment, which was started by a man who was an industrial filmer. He made like short films for industry, and his mother has had the early stages of Alzheimer's, and he's always filmed his mother because she's Dutch. And she has a very interesting accent when she talks in English. And he started filming his mother, and he made a little website on Facebook, and which he called Everyone's Oma, because it was about his mum. And he said, my mum is like everyone's mum. And his mother started to get Alzheimer's, and he was filming, and he's basically charting his life with, and there was no intention ever of making a documentary about this. It was a website, and he would put little 5-minute stories about, you know, taking my mother to the shops, taking my mother, you know, the importance of routine, taking her to the specialist, all this kind of thing. And that community grew and grew because there are people all around the world who are going through the same experience with an older relative. He made one clip that went viral, went all around the world. When the pandemic started, his mother her routine was to go to the shops once a week, to the supermarket, and it was an important part of her life, and she couldn't go because of the pandemic, and so he made a version of the supermarket at home, and he took his mother to the supermarket, okay, and she was kind of delighted, and this clip went all around the world and was on the James Corden show in the US and on Spanish TV and everywhere, and so suddenly his site exploded because everyone kind of followed, lots of people who had the same situation. And so he had, on the one hand, he's making all these different clips, so he had an endless amount of material, and then he had this site that was exploding and had thousands and thousands of people. And so he thought about making a documentary, and he funded the documentary to crowdfunding using the community that he'd created, and then he matched the crowdfunding money with state money, because he then went to the local film agency and said, look, I have all this money, and they matched up, and he then got a deal for that, and then he made, and the film is now in post-production, okay? But it's also a website with lots of different clips. And there are all sorts of interesting ethical questions that arose from that, because there came a point, first of all, where one day he made a clip which is about the frustrations of dealing with someone like this. Okay, and because he edited one day of his life with his mother into 5 minutes, he got a huge amount of people online saying, you're being cruel to your mother. Okay, you shouldn't treat her like that, because it looked like he was frustrated and was being cruel. And he was really upset by this because he hadn't expected it at all. So you suddenly begin to see, when you create a community, the community doesn't always, behave the way you want it to. Sometimes they can misunderstand, as he would put it. And it completely changed his way of thinking about the site. Then his mother started to get really advanced Alzheimer's. And there came the question of, at what point is it wrong to put my mother on screen like this? When do I stop? Okay? And then, but I've created this community that is really kind of involved with each other, and it's a really big community talking. And if I take away the central platform of the community, what responsibility do I have to that community? Not to my mother, but to the community I've created. And how do I do this? And this is a big, and it also becomes, incidentally, part of the documentary. The struggle he has with thinking about, starting to make the story. What do I do? And this is part, has become part of the story. And the answer is, in practical reality, what's happening is the site is slowly kind of mutating into a kind of an Alzheimer's children, suffering, children who are dealing with parents with Alzheimer's community. And it's becoming less about his individual mother and more about, it's becoming a shared resource. But he's spent, and this doesn't pay him, the amount of time it takes to make this happen and to do it responsibly and ethically is something that he never thought about when he started. Now again, I would say, next time he does anything like this, he will think, okay, I need to ask these questions from the very beginning. Okay? Other people making these kinds of documentaries could learn from him, because if you are dealing in these ethical areas, then these questions about how is it going to evolve and change, and what do you need to do about it, and how do you finance that? He's given up work to look after his mother. At one point he almost lost his house because he had to sell it. But, the economics of it are really difficult for him. And so these are the kind of questions, again, that you think, okay, from taking that as a case study, you can talk to documentarists generally who are interested in working with communities and say, these are the questions, if you're doing many kinds of documentaries or have ethical issues, this is what you need to be thinking about from the beginning. You need to design it, as it were, build this into the thinking from the start. And that, again, is something that starts at the end, that if you look at it and go, if you could have asked those questions earlier, his life would have been much easier in some way.
Are there any more questions? I think we have time for one last one. Okay, can I ask something then? We've talked a lot about the one end of the spectrum and how it's important to think about marketing early on, even earlier than development, and that the producers are getting more involved in this, and that is obviously a good thing. We know how it benefits the project to have a consistent language and know its identity and everything. But I wanted to ask, where does that leave distributors and exhibitors and even sales agents? Because we used to rely on, especially national distributors and exhibitors, to kind of share their feedback on what the actual market wants and needs and responds to. And that has moved kind of away. And what happens to the decisions that the producers make early on, and maybe they update them or maybe not, but when they reach the distributor and they tell them that actually for my market, that doesn't work. I need to work on this in a different way, on the positioning, on the marketing materials and everything. What does that mean? What is that relationship?
I don't think you can avoid it entirely, that there will be conflicts with distributors. I don't think there is any possibility that if your film travels a lot, your poster will remain consistent across all territories. I think it's very difficult. I don't think it's impossible. For example, we worked on an Austrian documentary that was in Locarno, 2019 or 20, I don't remember. And it was very celebrated and, all over the place, and the great reviews for the poster. People wanted to buy the poster we made, and, crazy. All over Facebook, all over social media, in every country, it was the same poster. Suddenly they go to Japan, boom, different poster, different title. And after many, many successes in Europe. So I don't think you can entirely stop it. What I would suggest to producers is maybe try to consult with a sales agent, because they are the people that you will be in contact. The distributor in China or in Japan, maybe you will have a conversation with them, but you're not going to be very closely related to them. But the sales agent who is dealing with the world, they should have a say And if they are early enough on board, they can also participate in this discussion and in the script, even in the creative development. But at least have them at the point that you are starting designing all your materials, before you log your poster and your trailer, it is good they are on board.
Okay. Yes.
I would just like to mention that when you are trying to submit a media development application, which is supposedly gives you money to develop your project, you're required to write, to describe your development strategy, financing strategy, and marketing strategy. How would you know that at the moment you haven't started even developing your film? So I believe that also for this job, to compile and submit media applications, this workshop will be very useful because it will teach people how to draft their marketing strategies. That's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Vicky, Steven, Mathias, thank you very much for your time.